Thanks for joining me here today. It's nice to see you back in these numbers and welcome those that are on the call as well. Appreciate you being here. This year has been like no other. All of us have been impacted by COVID, but certainly some have been impacted more than others. To those who've lost a loved one, my deepest condolences on behalf of your friends and neighbors across the province of Manitoba. COVID's handed us new challenges. It's handed us even greater challenges than before. The Manitobans have faced challenges before and will do it again. COVID nous a lancé de nouveaux défis et des défis encore plus grands qu'auparavant. COVID-19 has changed the landscape of our province, our country, and the world. The pandemic has ravaged through our healthcare systems. It's ravaged economies here and abroad. Yet, thus far, we have weathered this storm better than most, and the resilience of our economy, our finances, our public services, most of all of our people, have stood out strongly and have given all of us good reason to be proud. La résilience de notre économie, de nos finances, de nos services publics, et surtout de notre population s'est démarquée. In many ways, this year has shown Manitobans at their finest. To our healthcare workers, our nurses, our doctors, our first responders, our personal care home staff, who have risked their health to help others, I say thank you. To our frontline workers, our teachers, child care providers, our truck drivers, our retail workers, restaurateurs, who've done their best to keep Manitoba open, but yet safe and secure, I say thank you. And to our many business owners, some of whom had to close their doors, many of whom had to lay off staff, or all of whom have had to adjust to some degree their operations, and who have had to face the challenge and better than most provinces, frankly, of rehiring staff back, I say thank you to them as well. And to every Manitoban who reached out to help a neighbor, a friend, a stranger, stood up to volunteer, to the thousands of Manitobans who put their names forward to volunteer on our Help Next Door app, and just to those who've just been kind through this process, who've stood fast in the face of incredible uncertainty and fear. Thank you. Thank you for your kindness. Thank you for your willingness to listen to Dr. Roussin and Lynette Siragusa and do the things that they've recommended, the fundamental things that have helped keep you safe. Because when you're safe, you're keeping others safe too. During this time of need, nothing matters more to our government than protecting Manitobans, protecting your personal health, and protecting your financial health, because they're intertwined. We see that better now than we ever have. Ensuring a more secure Manitoba during this pandemic and a more prosperous Manitoba after this pandemic is our post-COVID reality challenge. Our government has been taking thoughtful and deliberate actions from the very beginning of this pandemic. Hundreds and hundreds of actions by our government have been taken, many of them in partnership with specific agencies working for the benefit of other Manitobans, many of them in partnership and in consultation with Manitobans themselves. And we're going to keep doing our very, very best to protect the services Manitobans need, to help Manitobans get their jobs back, and to protect the incomes of Manitobans and their families. We believe that Manitobans want and deserve a government that steps up for them and with them in good times and in bad times, and that is exactly what we've been doing, and that is exactly what we are committed to continuing to do. Today's speech from the throne provides 5 guaranteed commitments to protect Manitobans during this time of need, with a careful eye, not just on today, but also on the future. Le discours du trône d'aujourd'hui prévoit 5 engagements garantis pour protéger les Manitobains en cette période de besoin, avec un œil attentif sur l'avenir. Those guarantees are, number 1, to protect health care and vulnerable Manitobans with record new investments and initiatives for better care sooner as we build an even stronger health care system for Manitobans. 2, protecting jobs by creating more jobs and restarting our economy with new investment and business supports to create even better opportunities for Manitobans and those who choose to come here from around the world. 3, protecting your income by reducing the taxes you pay, saving you money, helping you keep more of your hard-earned money with you, where it was earned, where it was saved, where it belongs. And 4, protecting education and childcare by building a first-class K-12 education system with new schools, increased classroom funding, and more safe for parents and their children's educational outcomes and in their parents' childcare choices. And finally, protecting Manitoba's future by making sure we're addressing today's priorities without disregarding the priorities that we will have tomorrow. Always with an eye on tomorrow. Protecting Manitoba's financial, environmental, and energy legacy by pursuing a careful, 2-term, balanced budget goal to eliminate the COVID deficit while providing strategic investments in healthcare, education, and families. We cleaned up a mess when we came in, and we didn't know at the time, but we were preparing to do it again. These are 5 guaranteed commitments made by a government with a reputation for keeping its word. 5 guaranteed commitments to protect Manitobans during this unprecedented time. 5 guaranteed commitments that continue our government's work to fix the finances, repair the services, and rebuild our economy. Last week, some of us celebrated the accomplishment of balancing the budget, an achievement that does demonstrate, when anyone does it, whether in their home or in their small business, determination, discipline, caring, and foresight. It's an achievement made just in time to prepare us to strengthen our commitments to facing new, unprecedented challenges in this province, and together with our fellow Canadians, challenges across our country too. Manitobans are determined, Manitobans are resilient, and together we'll prevail and we'll thrive. That's how we'll live with COVID. That's how we've always lived. That's how we should live always. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
There's some reforms mentioned here that have been under agenda for a while. COVID sort of detracted from it or sidelined some of the plans. One is social assistance reform, and we saw some hints at it in a mandate letter earlier this year, and now we're seeing a throne speech that hints at instilling greater self-reliance.
Yeah.
What do you have in mind?
Well, we all know that the traditional mechanisms for delivering social assistance have actually fostered reliance as much as independence, and so we have to look at different mechanisms for offering programming that gets people into a skill development opportunity or a work opportunity more readily than has been the case in the past. So that's part of the agenda for our social services minister, and was in her mandate letter, of course, a year ago.
Yeah, I mean, the aim in the letter is
help people get work. Help people get jobs. The best social program is a job. The best social program is an intergenerational dependence on a welfare program.
So how do you
do that?
Encourage, nudge?
That's what you're going to see in the coming session.
Okay. The education reform, again, there have been many hints that we might see reduced numbers of school divisions. Whether they will be elected boards or not remains to be seen, and the throne speech talks about spending less money, wasting less money on school administration, division administration.
Too much money spent at the top in our education system. We need those resources to move to the front line. That's where they're useful to students and teachers. And so this program is, to me, tremendously exciting, as you know. I mean, I come from a family of educators, but I think all of us would say we wouldn't be where we are without the educational opportunities we were given. And this is critical because we're failing our kids when we're ranked 10th out of 10 in every major category of comparative analysis. So we need to look at better ways of doing things. That's why we commissioned what I call the Manus-Janus Commission, the Clayton Manus-Janus-McKinnon team, and they came together and they did a tremendous amount of work that we've had to put on hold as a consequence of COVID for a time. But that report will be coming out in the not too distant future, so Manitobans can have a look at it. What I'm pledging to Manitobans here is that just as we feel about Manitoba Hydro, that the owners aren't a political party. The owners of Manitoba Hydro are Manitobans. So anything we do with Manitoba Hydro, for example, is going to be done in full consultation with Manitobans. Same thing with our education system. In spades, our education system is one that serves all of us. It isn't there for the government to manage without full consultation, and that's what we're planning on doing. But we are strong believers, and we've made no secret of this, that there are resources that could be better put to use on the front lines to benefit our students in this province that right now are located far from the classroom.
Minister Gertson said that reforms wouldn't start until next summer at the earliest. You did just say not too distant future we're going to see the report. So are we going to see that report?
I think
this year?
I think some of the most significant reforms will take that long, but I don't think the consultation needs to take that long. I don't think that let me be clear, the commencement of putting the ideas out there for Manitobans to discuss, to share their thoughts on, doesn't need to wait that long. So we need to get that out there so Manitobans can have a look, so they can have their input opportunities, because this is a system that doesn't just belong to the government. This is a system that belongs to parents, students, right? Grandmas and grandpas, employers who want to see people coming out of schools ready to be trained for additional skilled jobs in our province, right? So this dialogue needs to happen. It's a very important part of this education reform initiative. This is ambitious. It is, I would say, apart from perhaps from Duff Roblin's initiatives back in the 60s, this is the most ambitious undertaking in education improvement and enhancement, the K-12 level, that our province has ever seen. But it's not going to be done, I want to be clear again, it's not going to be done from the top down, because the problem with our system right now is there's too much top down. It's going to be done with the involvement of Manitobans.
Freedom of speech mentions a new law to prevent blockades of infrastructure, trespassing, et cetera.
I want to phrase that, I think, more accurately. Okay, it's our police agencies are telling us there need to be greater clarity in terms of what their role was supposed to be and could be. Some will argue there are already laws, but there wasn't sufficient clarity around those laws, according to input we were getting from others. So the idea here is to make it clear what the obligations are of law enforcement officials in respect of protecting public property, not just private property.
Are you modeling it on Alberta's law?
I won't get into that. The Justice Minister will be leading that initiative, but it's important to understand, first of all, this is in no way, shape, or form to be taken as a restriction on legal protest. Lawful protest is a right. Everybody has that right. I will defend that right. Especially I'll defend it when people are protesting things I don't agree with, because that's the test of your principle on that issue. But there is no way that this is designed to infringe on anyone's right to lawful protest. But when you extend your own rights in such a manner in a protest that you take away someone else's rights, then there's a consequence to that should be felt. And so this legislation, apparently, it will be necessary to make sure that that is clear.
Can you give an example of when someone else's rights are violated by the extension of your
Well,
personal?
the old adage is, if you want to wave your arms around and protest, that's fine, just don't put them in contact with my nose. The fact of the matter is that property that belongs to someone else does not belong to you, and if you are violating someone else's rights in the process of your protest, then you're breaking the law.
Remote learning is only available for students who are immunocompromised. Some divisions are making some other leeways. You're talking about a blended learning strategy. Will anyone who wants remote learning, will they be able to get it?
I'll let Kelvin Gertson speak to the educational issues that you raise right now. I'll only say that we understand in this time of unprecedented challenges that there are circumstances that are rearing their head almost on a daily basis that we couldn't have possibly anticipated. Some you would think we could, and I know there'll be many who say the day after something happens that we should have known about it happening the day before. I get that. It goes with the turf. But the fact remains that educational challenges are going to be monumental through this time. They have been and they'll continue to be, and we'll do our very best to make sure not only that we're addressing the needs of education during COVID, but that we're also, as I referenced earlier, at the same time, facing the challenges of making the education system work better for those in the future who need it, and all of us do.
More private liquor. I know you were expanding the number of wine stores. This sounds like something bigger.
Well, it's a throne speech, you know. I think I got to say, I think here really clearly what we're after is better customer service, and we've. I'll go back for a second. It's not in the throne speech, but it's important to understand. Remember, just a few months ago, we were facing an unprecedented number of criminal events within liquor outlets that was adversely affecting people directly, some who were assaulted, others who were fearful to go to work, others who were fearful to shop in the liquor stores, right? The measures we've taken in that respect have, I think, to a great degree, improved the customer experience, put it that way. Improving the customer experience going forward is important in every aspect of what governments do. And so better choice, better options, fairer prices, these are all, I think, are important goals. The detail on how we'll get there will be forthcoming in due course.
Hard liquor being sold privately in urban centers now?
Detail of how we're going to get there will be forthcoming in due course. But I will reference, in the context of customer service, my dissatisfaction with the waits people are enduring right now in terms of COVID testing. And I want to assure Manitobans that our government's not happy with the lack of action on our own part. So we're taking steps right now. There'll be additional testing sites, some of which have been announced. There'll be more. But there are many other aspects to this. There are bottlenecks potentially. There are some bottlenecks now that have occurred. We're making every effort to make sure that people are able to get tested who have symptoms, because, and I would encourage Manitobans who don't, not to make the lineups longer for those who do.
Why can't you just add more hours right now to the existing sites?
Well, I'll let the appropriate minister make those announcements at the appropriate time, but it's a great point. That's a question I've asked and others have asked as well. I have friends who are nurses who work 12-hour shifts, yet the testing is 8 hours. It doesn't make sense to me. So we're looking at a number of initiatives like that.
Sir, the new education funding, will that be a reallocation of funds, or will that be new debt? I think it was $1.6 billion.
Brand new money.
Pardon me?
Brand new money.
Right.
Yeah. And look, I'm a Manitoban, so that adage I've always had trouble with about you get what you pay for doesn't work very well with me. I watched the previous government spend money on a ton of things that weren't worth buying. I want to get value out of our education reforms. I think we can get better value out of our education reforms, but we have to face the challenges of making sure that we're investing in the real necessary investments that will improve the quality of our education in the province. And when you, as I have, reviewed the draft report from the Clayton Manus Janice McKinnon document, you will see a number of recommendations there, and they're not free. There's going to be some things that have to happen. There's going to have to be some significant additional investment. And we're ready to make those investments. We're ready to make those commitments, because none of us, as I said before, none of us would be where we are in our lives without the opportunities education provides. We have to do a better job. We're going to have to invest more to get that better result that we're after.
The Manitoba Métis Federation put out a news release saying that you reneged on reconciliation with Bill 34 and the collection of what they
Just
say
stack it on the wall with the other 50 things David Chartrand's complaining about.
$385 million in CSA payments. Can you
Yeah,
comment on
whatever. Any other questions?
Mr. Premier, regarding...
Sorry, Carol, I think was first,
I'm
Clay.
sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you. Can you talk a little bit about the phased-in elimination of the property tax?
Yeah.
How long that will take and how you're going to recoup that revenue?
Yeah, well, we phased out other taxes, or we've just simply lowered them, and we've made up for it by focusing on growing our economy effectively, and that's what we count on doing as we go forward. Our revenues aren't well gained in our government by taxing people out of their own homes, by punishing people who make improvements in their own businesses, and by hurting families who are struggling enough right now to make ends meet without having to pay disproportionately higher education taxes on their property than anybody else in Canada. So we made a commitment in the last election campaign to face up to this challenge and change the way we get our money for education so that we stopped penalizing Manitobans with a disproportionately high education tax burden. We said that we would begin that process of phasing out after we balance the books. We keep our word. We balanced our books. Now we're going to start phasing out the education tax. More details to come in the budget speech.
How can you do that at the same time as getting back to a balanced budget?
Same way we've done it since we became government. We phased down the PST while increasing revenues sufficient to cover off our ability to invest even more in healthcare, education, and social services than any other province in the country. I mean, walk and chew gum at the same time. This is a government that keeps its word. We made a promise to Manitobans that we begin that phase out, and we're going to keep our word.
You said Manitobans need more tax relief sooner. Will that go beyond the phasing out of the education property tax?
Not as much as I'd like, Tom. I want to be really frank on this. I think our taxes are too high in many categories, and I would like to see more done on tax phase-out in a number of categories. We are going to proceed with the business tax reductions that we committed to. That's going to be, I'm not supposed to refer to what's in bills yet because they haven't been tabled, but I'll just say that's on the agenda. We're going to take the PST off some things that shouldn't have ever been put on. We've already done that on home insurance, as you know. That's going to be done also on probate charges. When a family loses someone, they get a bill for it, when they file probate, as you know. Also on tax returns. When you file your tax return, it's bad enough you have to pay taxes, then you have to pay somebody to file the return, and then you have to pay PST on that. We're going to take the PST off that. These things added together are part of that $2,020 tax enhancement that would reduce your tax on average per household by over $2,000. But I'd like to do more, but we can't right now. We can't because we're in the midst of COVID. We're in the midst of COVID right now. We've got escalating costs in virtually every category, as you know. And so I say to Manitobans, I understand you're struggling to make ends meet. I'd like to see some of these bills kept lower. We're trying our best to do that, but we're trying to be realistic and balanced in what we do. And so we think that this is an achievable goal to move to balance over an 8-year period. And we believe that keeping our word on the education tax is achievable, most certainly important for us to do. Because frankly, I've talked to many seniors who say it's a discouragement of them staying in their own homes. We've got to change it for that reason, if for no other.
The overall PST cut to 6%, that was originally pushed back a year, and then you indicated that due to COVID, that might be off.
That's what I'm alluding to, Steve. I don't think it's achievable in the not-too-distant future. We'll evaluate. But I don't think it's achievable to drop the PST. No.
What changes?
I'd like to. You know me, I'd like to leave the money with Manitoban. This is fundamentally the thing that's got us the progress we've got. I got to say it. And it's going to sound hokey to some people, but it's my fervent belief that Manitobans work hard for their money, and they're pretty good at managing it. If you leave a little more money with Manitobans, that's discretionary income. That creates jobs. And we're seeing that. We're seeing people getting their jobs back. We're seeing businesses rehire. Not everybody, of course not everybody. I mean, catering business, tough business to be in right now. But the fact of the matter is that people are getting their jobs back. And that's way better than a social program. And it's in large part because Manitobans are helping do that. They're helping by supporting small businesses in our province right here with their purchasing power, right? They're helping by making, I talked to a friend of mine does hardware business, home renovation stuff. He says, never been so busy. People are spending more time in their homes, and I guess maybe as they do that, they're going, hey, let's fix that thing up that we've been walking around for the last few years, So that's helpful, right? Because that's getting the person who works at that hardware store or delivers that stuff, getting them a job back. This is good stuff, right? And you don't do that by just jacking up taxes as we were doing the previous decade. You don't do that. You take the money out of the household, give it to the government, and then they say, well, look at us creating jobs. No. People in Manitoba are doing a really good job of creating jobs right now. We're helping. We're doing our best to support with the wage subsidy program is one way. But it's really Manitobans that deserve the credit. And I think understanding that is an important aspect of what a government's responsibilities are.
The counter-argument is that had you not cut the PST or some of the other taxes, you would have more money to increase testing at COVID centers, at sampling sites. You would have money to expand schools.
So you got to be careful here that we don't lapse into what I call, emergency opportunism, okay? Got to be careful. If you hadn't cut taxes, we'd have more money to do everything, right? That's the argument some people are making. If we hadn't cut taxes, there'd be $750 million less in the hands of Manitobans right now. Okay? So, look, we moved to balance while reducing taxes. We restored a rainy day fund that was basically depleted. And we continued to invest more than anybody else. Now, never as much as some advocates would say we should, but more than anybody else in Canada in healthcare, education, and social services. We've got fewer kids in state care now. We quintupled the amount of money for educational scholarships. Okay, we're doing everything we can within the constraints we've been handed to sustain and manage, not just to solve problems today, not to draw attention to ourselves, but rather to strengthen Manitobans' ability to be financially secure themselves, to have a job. And this is what this government's about. I'm proud of that, and I'm proud of this throne speech. A lot of work went into this, and this is our focal point for our coming session, but it doesn't just focus on the short term. It also pays attention to the longer term, because we're going to be, hopefully, all of us living here for the longer term, and we're going to bear the consequences if we don't also think about what the long term is going to look like.
How do you get your agenda through, given the opposition tactics in the spring and that we've seen,
I would argue that the opposition would be damaging to themselves if they were to try to block the legislature again. They just achieved, 1 year ago, they got the third worst electoral outcome in NDP history. We had the second best in the history of the PC Party of Manitoba. That's pretty considerable accomplishment. That's a mandate. We were given a mandate by the people of Manitoba. If the opposition wants to stand up and block our legislative agenda again, I don't think Manitobans will like that very much.
What changes are planned for the city charter, and what do you hope to accomplish with them?
Sorry, I couldn't get you, Bartley.
What changes are planned for the city of Winnipeg charter, and what do you hope to accomplish with those changes?
I can't tell you how important it is that we move some of the obstacles out of the way, and I'm going to segue from your topic for a second. Some of the obstacles to development in our province out of the way. We're basically the only province that lets the elected people have a veto on development projects. And you're seeing at the city what's happening as a consequence of that. You're seeing lawsuits, you're seeing contempt of court charges, but mostly what you're not seeing is the money that's not being invested in the province of Manitoba, because it's not being invested, because the delays are becoming known to development people around the country, and they're excessive. Most jurisdictions don't have Tammany Hall in place anymore. They don't have political people able to veto projects. They have a process that's defined, they have a plan that's understood, and then when you come in, if we raise some money because we want to do some development, it can't be vetoed at the end by a councillor somewhere in our city. It goes through a process. We're one of the only jurisdictions in the country that doesn't allow appeals on those decisions. This is archaic. So these are changes that we have to pursue, and I know my minister's been working very hard with city officials, elected and unelected, to advance these ideas. We need to get out of the myopic, tubular way of thinking on development and start thinking about what's good, not just for me and this block, but what's good for the province of Manitoba as a whole. And the sooner we do that, the sooner we'll become a more attractive place for new jobs and new investment.
On the education reform, just
Yes,
want to
sir.
clarify this. You mentioned we'll get the report in the not-too-distant future. Is that happening this year then? And in terms of the reforms, Mr. Gerson said by the summer at the earliest. Is that still the case?
Well, again, I think I've answered your question, Ian. I hope I have. The consultation with Manitobans is essential through this process. To have a consultation, one has to put the ideas out there for a consultation to frame the discussion, and we intend to do that.
So you'll release
The
the report?
report and our response to it.
You'll put out the report before the end of the calendar year?
I'm not going to time frame it. I'll let the minister do that. But our intention is to give Manitobans time to have a look at this. We held off doing that in the early days of COVID, I think justifiably, and I think that was the consensus, that was the right move at that time. But I don't think we can hold off indefinitely. We don't know how long we're going to live with COVID. And education reform is important enough. I think we need to have a discussion on it. And I think, to be fair, it's important that people not only read the report, which is designed to be a very broad exercise, a very intense study of many, many issues, but I think also to put out there, well, what are we going to do with the report? So the government's reaction to the report has to be out there for the public to have a look at that as well.
Reforming the education system while there's a pandemic going on?
What are we going to do if there's another pandemic? We can't stop looking for improvements in the mid and long term that are important for our children and use the pandemic as a reason to stop. So I get that we couldn't, that it wasn't the right time to introduce the report early in the year. I get that, but Manitobans, I think, are quite ready to have a discussion about their education system while COVID is still going on. I don't think Manitobans want us to stand back and do nothing on an education system and use the pandemic as a reason not to proceed. So I think there's a discussion that we have to have. Look, we have discussions on many other things in the middle of COVID. Not everything, I mean, as much as we're all preoccupied with COVID right now, we're not totally preoccupied with it. So surely we can discuss our education system in this context. So that's the general structure. More to say on that. The education minister will announce details in the not-too-distant future.
Premier, one of the things about the education reform is reducing the number of school divisions in the province.
Yeah.
I haven't found anyone who thinks so. Everyone I've talked to says we have way too many school divisions. How many do you think we should have?
I think we should have a discussion about how many we have, and I think we should take a look at best practices, and I know that the Commission has done some of that work. I think that's really important. You know, when you have a child who's got a problem at school, you don't go to the superintendent, and the superintendents know that. You go to the teacher, probably, first of all. Potentially, if there's a problem with the teacher, you might go to the principal or vice principal. We need educational leaders in our schools, and we have them. But what we don't need to do is continue to invest excessively in the top of our administrative structures to the detriment of the front line of our educational institutions. That's where the educational system should be measured and accountable and where it works best. So we need to make sure that we make those necessary changes. We have to have a discussion about that.
Thank you, Mr. Premier. We're going to go to the telephone now. Up first from Global, Brittany.
Good afternoon, Premier Pallister. On the education reform, when we look at that, you said some of these will be big changes that need to happen. How quickly can some of these changes start to happen?
It's a great question, Brittany. There are so many areas of discussion that we need to have as Manitobans together that it's tough to categorize, 6 months, a year, 2 years. I can only say that the magnitude of the importance of getting a better educational system for our kids is something I think we can all agree on, and the question of how we make those changes and the time frames will be addressed as a consequence of us having that dialogue as Manitobans. But we need to move forward to make sure we're delivering on the promise of better education for our kids. And this is a time to pursue this goal.
And you mentioned today a little bit about the COVID testing weights and the steps that were being taken by your government to help fix that, including additional sites. How many more additional sites can we see, and how quickly are we going to be able to get this up? Because, again, we're hearing daily from people, not just about the long waits, but the long wait for results.
There's several aspects to this, Brittany. Without getting into the weeds, I can tell you that we have been getting into the weeds in terms of our analysis, our discussions. Just had a great discussion recently with my enterprise team. So this is people who have perspectives on business management in different areas, not just exclusively in healthcare, but also in terms of things like industrial management of flows and bottlenecks and things like that. So we could see if there's transferable knowledge we could gain from them, and there is. So we're looking to act on a number of these fronts with the goal of making sure that we don't sacrifice the reliability of the test. That's a big deal. It's fine. You've got to address the wait times, but you have to maintain the reliability. What we don't want to do is have someone have to wait too long and then go in and get a test that says that they're okay when they're not, because that's just going to create danger for them and their family and everyone they come into contact with. The other issues Bartley alluded to actually in a preamble earlier, there are many, but the time it takes to process and return the test result is important. Also, the tracking component. Ontario just suspended essentially their tracking and tracing mechanisms because they're overburdened. We can't do that. We can't allow that. So we've got to make sure that we have beefed up tracking capabilities and tracing capabilities, and that contacting is being done by a group right now that should be expanded. We're looking for ways to make sure that we expand that size of that group to increase their capability. It's an old adage, but I think it's very true. We need to hope for the best, but we should be preparing constantly for the worst. We've seen worsening situations in many parts of the world right now. We have to be prepared and better prepared to make sure that we are getting accurate testing results to Manitobans in a reasonable period of time. I'll just mention, too, that we have now assurance from Abbott Not that they will take our order, because the federal government has a block order provision on the new testing kits, what I'll call the mobile testing kits, without getting into the science, because I can't. But just suffice to say, the testing kits, which we see could be tremendously useful here to enhance rapidity of response, and also to enhance the ability of people to get tested who are in rural northern areas where it's not easy to get into a lineup at the local site. We've got assurance from Abbott that we are one of 2 provinces that is next in line to the federal government in terms of being able to get that order satisfied. That's better than nothing. It would be better if we could have placed the order.
From the Brandon Sun, Colin.
Mr. Premier, with the test that you said that the federal government is blocking your purchase of, they're saying that there is no block. Do you think this discrepancy in your positions on this coming from?
Well, the federal government's placed an order, and Abbott is the company that's developed the initial test. There may be others coming. By placing their order, and in fact, stated by the Abbott representative, that the federal government has precedence over all provinces. What this means is that provinces can't place their own orders. My problem with that isn't bulk buying. I've been advocating that health products and in some cases services could be bulk bought for lower prices. That's not my problem. That seems to me to make some sense. What doesn't make sense to me is that you would then restrict our ability to order on top of that. And that's the effect that this has. What doesn't make sense to me is that the federal government has communicated to me that they will decide where all those are allocated. They won't be allocated on a per capita basis. What that could mean is that another province with higher incidence of COVID gets all the machinery and equipment they need, and Manitoba, which is doing still better than most of the provinces, doesn't get that product. That's not as a Premier of Manitoba, I'm not satisfied with that. I hope that's sufficiently clear.
I saw in the throne speech that you're renewing your calls for the federal government to provide health care funding. What progress has been made on that front since your trip to Ottawa and the federal throne speech, if any?
Progress that's been made is that the premiers, regardless of political stripe, are totally unanimous that this is the top priority. Everyone understands that the demands for health care are growing and are likely to accelerate. They also understand that the percentage of federal support is diminished. Not that pure dollars, as Tom Broadbeck has recently and frequently reported, but the actual percentage of the total dollars has diminished and is likely to continue to. As demand grows and federal participation reduces, wait times grow. And the wait time study that which I'll release to you in more detail soon, has demonstrated that our wait times are triple in many categories over 20 years ago. Triple. Now it's happened gradually, so people didn't notice, I guess. But the fact is, triple for the time you wait from a diagnosis to get treatment, or time you wait from a GP to get to see a specialist, things like that. You're waiting 3 times as long. That's not a good system. So the good news is the premiers are totally united. The good news is the Prime Minister's agreed to have a discussion. He says a meeting, but we'll see. That's good news. The bad news is we got one political organization in the whole country who stood up and said and attacked the government for standing up for health care and shorter wait times, and that was the Ndp in Manitoba. No other premier has had any opposition party say, let's use this for partisan purposes. This is Ndp premiers, Liberal premiers, Conservative premiers, all standing together, saying the same thing that health regulators, academics, labor groups have said for some time now. This is a problem that needs to be addressed.
From CTV Winnipeg, Jeff.
Hi, Mr. Premier, Jeff, CTV Winnipeg. When you say the speech says, instruct Manitoba Hydro to keep rates at 3% or lower, is that just simply a mandate? Do you need legislation for that? And do you envision that beyond just 1 year?
Well, we have legislation to strengthen the Public Utilities Board and to strengthen the transparency with which it works and reduce the costs of running the Public Utilities Board. So that is legislation that's upcoming. What we have aspired to do with respect to Manitoba Hydro is make sure that we're protecting ratepayers. And this is not the time to jack up rates, as was recommended by some in the previous board. We have challenges economically all across the country, and certainly Manitoba is no exception. And we don't need accelerated hydro rates at this point in time.
My second question is, there's a lot of small businesses, and specifically restaurants and bars and things like that, who are looking at this throne speech for help or signal. What's in here that will provide them direct aid through the winter? Because, you know, the patio season is ending. There's now new orange restrictions. They're, you know, some of them are on the brink, so to speak, Mr. Premier. I know you know this. But what's in this speech today that could maybe bring them some relief in their mind?
The largest percentage by industry subscribers to our programs are restaurant and hospitality industries. We have literally thousands of people working in those industries right now because of our wage subsidy program. We have continued to demonstrate our support for small business in a real way with the most generous cash programs and supports in the country of Canada. It'll never be enough to get beleaguered industries back the losses they've had to incur through this time. I understand that, and I'm totally sympathetic to it. But the fact remains, comparatively speaking, that we have the most generous programming in the country of small business support. And again, we'll continue to monitor the situation as we move forward. We know and we appreciate the cooperation that small business community has shown through our consultation processes. We've been meeting, I think we just had our 44th meeting with groups representing hundreds of thousands of working Manitobans, including the hotel and restaurant industry. And we've been meeting and listening to their requests and their suggestions and acting on many of them. But we'll never be able to satisfy all the demands of every group in our province, so I think we've got to be frank about that. We're doing the best we can in the times that we're living in, but as far as the response of the restaurant industry, hotel industry, I would say it's been nothing short of courageous through this whole process, even in recent times, supporting our reduced hours, knowing that it's hard, knowing that it imposes additional challenges on our businesses, but they know that the best way to get back on our feet is to fight COVID together. That's what we're doing.
From City News, Jonas.
Good afternoon, Mr. Premier. Question on the two-term balanced budget plan. If I remember correctly, we're heading for about a $2.9 billion deficit here in this fiscal year. Who knows what the next one's going to hold? Is a two-term, I guess, how do you think a two-term budget balance or to get the deficit back is possible?
I'm a practical guy, Jonas. I've watched governments for a long time have no plan. I'm watching the federal government have no plan towards moving to sustainability. No plan for recovery. I don't like that. So we have a plan for recovery. We have a plan to rebuild. It's a plan. It's better than no plan.
And as a follow-up, I guess, you have a plan in place, but with so many variables, I mean, is it more than hope? I mean, I guess that's kind of the question I'm asking.
It's a fair question, and it's a good question, because you're right. The plus minuses are incredible. We don't know what this pandemic is going to throw at us. From week to week, things change, things shift. The fact remains that you have a choice to make in the middle of that. You either have a plan or you don't. I was lost in the middle of a desert. If I didn't have a plan, I'd probably have died there. You have to have a plan. A plan gives you hope. Sometimes it's not realistic. Sometimes it's challenged by others who think that a different plan is better. I just read the Ndp Plan for the future. It's all recycled old ideas from Greg Selinger and Gary Dewar. Nothing new in it. No pricing. None. Not a reference to $1. That's not a plan. We have a plan. We had a plan when we came in. It was worse than we thought. That was 5 years ago. We had genuinely billion-dollar deficits to contend with 5 years ago. Now, this is worse, but I don't think we would have got the progress we've achieved over the last 5 years without a plan. And we're not going to get out of this mess listening to people who don't have one. I have one. Our government has one. We're going to act on it, We're going to keep doing the fundamental things right. But it all depends on Manitobans. And that's why I'm optimistic. Manitobans are following the COVID recommendations of Dr. Roussin. They are, for the most part. And I encourage those who have been fatigued by these restrictions to remember that they are saving lives when they listen and they do the things that Dr. Roussin's recommending. Just keep doing that. The future's in our hands. We're all doing the best we can. I hope we continue to do that, and that's how we get back on track. Our future recovery as a province depends upon that. So the credit for any progress we've made in only a small part goes to the government. Mostly it goes to Manitobans.
Thank you, Mr. Premier. We now return to the floor.
Mr. Premier, the Chief Peguis statute, along with commemorating his achievements and his role, will that interpretation mention how the reserve land granted to him was stolen 2 generations later?
I don't know, we've got a group coming together, Métis, Indigenous, non-Indigenous people, people with historical knowledge. I'm hopeful that there'll be a genuine recognition of Chief Peguis's contribution and role, and it'll reflect accurately on that contribution.
Do you envision
It'll
that
be the first Indigenous person recognized on this legislative grounds. I think that's important in its symbolism, but I think it's important in reality. We wouldn't be where we are without frankly, as a province, without the work of Chief Peguis and people like him. They're forward-thinking people.
Do you envision that the economy could be shut down in Manitoba to the degree it was earlier in the pandemic if caseloads start to get worse?
Tom, that's why that passionate entreaty I just gave is so important. I think it's critical that Manitobans understand the future's in their hands. And if we have people who disrespect and disregard their own health and well-being, it's going to make it worse for everybody else. I've said many times and at every opportunity to, not just to young people, but young people are comprising a higher percentage of a higher percentage of the positive tests lately. Say to them, yeah, okay, fine. The science shows that you're not going to feel as sick as a person my age or, an older person will when they get COVID. That's no excuse, because if you get it, there's a really good chance you're going to give it to somebody else. So think about somebody else. And I think that entreaty is what every parent in the province is probably telling their children, I hope on a regular basis. I hope it's what every young person who loves their grandmother is going to think. Be careful. Do the right things. And while you're doing it, be kind to those who may forget. And just encourage them to, do their best, too.
How worse do you think it would have to get
before
we shut down the economy
Well,
to the extent that we did earlier in the pandemic?
Yeah. So I'm not sure.
You must have some contingency plans.
I should have asked
You're
this.
looking forward.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you, Tom. I realized that on the last one, the people on the phone couldn't hear these questions. Can they?
Yeah.
Okay, good, because I was going to repeat your question, because it's a good question. We have to work towards being the best people we can be in this context. We have to do everything we can to help our friends and neighbors do that, too. We have to do that. Some will say we're going too far at times. Others will say we're not going far enough. But one thing we can't possibly fail to do is to follow the fundamentals of social distancing. To do that and to make sure that we keep safe ourselves is our best defense in keeping our family safe as well. So this Thanksgiving, just keep it close to home. This Halloween, keep it close to home.
But how bad would things have to get before you shut down the economy again?
Well, we have laid that out in our color-coded system. So that's there. Dr. Roussin will lead in the interpretation and the data analysis that governs us in those decisions. But I would implore Manitobans to make sure that we don't get there. We've seen what happens in other jurisdictions when it happens. I would hope every Manitoban cares enough about their fellow Manitobans that the last thing they would want to do is make somebody else sick, and to do it through a deliberate ignoring of the rules and of the conduct that's been so clearly laid out so repeatedly. We've even bought an advertising campaign to try to encourage people who might not read the paper or watch the news on a regular basis to try to help them understand too. There's people out there who have said that that's the first time they'd heard about that stuff. You know, that's good that they're hearing it, but now you got to do it. And I know that's hard, and I know that Manitobans are fatigued. We're all fatigued. But as I've said before, and I'll say again, this is not a sprint. This is a marathon, and we have to be conscious constantly of just maintaining that pace that you runners that are paying attention know is so critical.
Is this the last throne speech of Brian Pallister, PC government?
Bartley, I have questions for you in the media. When are all of you resigning? I understand. I hear that a rumor that you're all resigning soon. Does CBC have a good severance program? I'm just curious. Look, I'm enjoying, if I can say this, I'm enjoying the challenges of this position. I am proud of the work of Manitobans. I'm proud of the work of our team in government. I'm inspired to do the best I can to give back. That's why I got into public life in the first place. That's why I would stay. So.
Do you have the COVID alert app on your phone yet?
Yeah, and I would encourage Manitobans, thank you for raising that. I encourage Manitobans to make sure that they do that. We have sent that out as a notice to all our public servants, not just in core government, but also in our crowns, the so-called mush sector as well. But I would encourage Manitobans to make sure they have subscribed to that app and that they're part of it, because that will really assist us if things do worsen, as the black cloud over his head reporter for the Free Press, Tom Broadbeck, has just asked me to consider. The worsening situation, we can make it less worse if we're all subscribing to that system. Also, we should take the advice of the aforementioned Mr. Broadbeck, and I will be doing that, and getting a flu shot. We should do that as well. We've seen some remarkable reductions in Australia recently, as an example, but in several jurisdictions, of instances of cases of the flu. And part of that is people are going and taking the time to prepare themselves and protect themselves. That's part, I think, of the analysis that's showing that. So I encourage Manitobans to do those two things: get the app and get a flu shot.
Premier, you did cite, or the speech cites, the Special Immigration Credential Recognition Program. Is that a new stream that will allow more immigrants into the province?
I've been advocating for that since before I entered public life, and I'll continue to. I was so proud to be part of the government that brought in the provincial nominee program. I think it's a wonderful program. I've had other premiers tell me that they're really envious of the fact that we brought that forward, and they're now copying Manitoba's initiative. And I would mention Bonnie Mitchelson in this, who was the minister that spearheaded that initiative. Having more immigration to Manitoba through the nominee program is important. We've been able, and I haven't got recent numbers since COVID, but we were able to reduce the backlog, the waiting time for applicants in that process. But the credential recognition piece is one that needs continued focus and improvement. And so we're very excited to see that improvement happen.
Mr. Premier, 3 new deaths were just announced today.
Yeah.
Can you comment?
Well, I'll say again, our condolences to any family who's lost a family member, any friend who's lost a friend through COVID. It's dramatically clear that all of us are in this together, and we need to do everything we possibly can to protect one another through this time. We're Manitobans, for heaven's sakes. We stand up for one another. Please make sure that you do that. And again, our heartfelt condolence to the families of those who've lost their lives to COVID.